Welcome to Wine Library TV. I am your host, Gary Vaynerchuk, and this, my friends, is the Thunder Show, aka the internet's most passionate wine program, and we are here on a very lovely Monday morning as the Jets went on the road and snuck one out. Mont, you catch that? Did you watch a little bit of that? No? Did you watch your Giants?
Of course.
Barely beat the Lions at home. I mean, what's going on there? Or you played well? What was it? I only saw the score. I didn't watch the game.
I gotta take my hats off to the Lions.
They played hard.
They're scrappy.
They're scrappy. I'm worried about our game against them in a couple weeks.
And I think finally Detroit might put together something down there.
Yeah, I think they got something brewing. But the Jets won a big game. I know there were some controversial calls on both sides. I'm obviously very happy, and I'm happy for another reason, because the gentleman to the right of me is an importer that I've been a fan of for a very, very long time. I feel like I've been buying wines with the stamp of approval on the back of the label for as long as I've been buying wine. So, you know, going back to 95, 96. And I'm excited to have him here. Peter, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Gary.
Why don't you tell the Vayner Nation, Peter Weygandt, a little bit about how you got into the wine business first. Let's start with that. Obviously, just to put into context, you're an importer of very fine wine. Mm-hmm. How many wineries do you represent?
About 75 from France, about a dozen from Austria, 3 from Germany, 6 or 7 from Italy, and 2 in Spain.
And I noticed you didn't mention Australia, but I know you were importing wines from Australia, right?
I have one yet from Australia, but
you still have one.
I've moved out of Australia.
Yeah, but you were during there was that really nice spike for Australian wines. You did make a play in there.
Yes, we had a good time. We had
So why don't you paint a picture to everybody who's watching? You know, we've been very fortunate. I feel like the one great thing about doing Wine Library TV is I've been lucky enough to have some of the best importers in the world on the show, and I put you right in that class. And so why don't you tell everybody your philosophy, and even taking it further back, tell me exactly how you got into the wine business.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much for having me here. I'm really happy to be here.
Good, appreciate it.
I got started, it's it's kind of a funny story, really got started in the wine business as a hobby. I started importing wines. It came from a trip in 1985 when a good retailer friend of mine, Rick Ostrand, at State Line in Maryland, let me great guy. Let me tag along to France with him, and it was on that trip that we stumbled upon or made the acquaintance of Jackie and Liliane Truchot, growers in Burgundy and Maurice Saint-Denis, and finding them and wanting to do something with their wine kind of got me started. And in a couple of years, we did that. And
so take me back a little step. Was this a trip that you and him just went along on, or did he back then take a group of good customers on trips, as so many retailers around the country back then especially did?
Yeah, no, this was really it was his trip. He was going with an importer. And
I see. So he, as the customer of an importer,
right,
was on a trip. Yeah. And were you a top nerdy customer of his? Was it maybe not the biggest spending guy, but the one that kind of was most passionate about it?
I would say that's a pretty good characterization.
Right?
Yeah, I was not a big spender, but I asked an awful lot of questions.
So you were really into wine?
Oh, yes.
Take me back this has to be 1 second. What got you into wine originally? Grew up with it?
No. I grew up on a farm in Illinois, and the family was teetotalers.
I see.
It wasn't until I went to college and law school that I started to drink wine.
So
got fascinated with it. Through family, my older brother, older sister, and I was fascinated, particularly with having grown up on a farm, with the terroir, the sort of the geographical, agricultural, historical.
Why is it good there, and from where and how? Got it. So that was the connection.
Yeah.
So you got into it in law school, and then that led to you just going to wine shops and asking questions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And so were you reading anything at the time? Were you reading Hugh Johnson's books or anything of that nature?
Yeah, Hugh Johnson, I think, remains for me still the reference point, because it puts everything in perspective from the point of view of terroir and geology. Yeah, I collected and was very, very interested. Like, for instance, when I was in law school, maybe that should have told me something right then and there. I didn't study as well as I should have, but I did memorize the entire 1855 classification and all the Grand Cru of Burgundy.
That should have told you everything.
Yeah.
Well, listen, great. You followed your passion, and here you are, right? Yeah. I mean, so you go on this trip, and this was another importer's trip, which is interesting, right? Mm-hmm. And was that a famous importer? Mm-hmm. Is it allowed to be said whose trip it was?
I think we probably wouldn't go.
It's 30 years. I mean, I think at this point, it doesn't. I don't think it's like yesterday's, I'm sure the news is out there somewhere.
Okay.
Okay, so whose trip was it?
It was, Rick was always good friends with Danny Haas and Vaynerchuk, and so they were very generous to me. They got me into some great places.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
Was Vincent Jardin part of their portfolio then?
I don't know. We didn't
Got
visit
it.
there.
So you go on this trip, and you guys are poking around, and you bump into these people, and is Danny Haas bringing those wines in at the time, or no?
Yes.
Got it. So got it. So
we were just visiting. Oh yeah, we went to
his places.
Yeah, went to Monjar Bunier. At the end of every visit, that they'd open up a really good bottle of wine.
Yeah, it's fun, right?
That was fun. Yeah.
So you went on this trip, and you're like, maybe I should do this.
Well, meeting the true shows was really determinative. Jackie makes a style of wine that really, for me, is beautiful. It
spoke to you.
Really fits with my palate, and I think is sort of the benchmark for what it is that I've always looked for in wine. Complexity, terroir, length, balance.
And so you, so that hits you, and that made you want to represent wines like that. Mm-hmm. Yes. And you didn't want to be a retailer though at that point, or you did?
No. I pictured myself as an importer,
traveling around, touching the farms.
Yeah, I guess a glorified prospector.
So what happened next? You come home from the trip. Mm-hmm. You have a great time. What's the first thing you do?
Well, we had to think about this for a while.
Sure.
It took a while, but
how long did you sit on it?
About a year and a half.
So it's playing around in your mind.
Yeah, and then have to go through all the
paperwork. But did you start the paperwork quickly?
No, it was about a year.
Got it. Yeah. And so you go through the paperwork, and now you have an importer's
license. And then fortunately Rick helped me by buying those first few years.
So that was a really important relationship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So who were your first, wineries in your portfolio?
Well, Jackie Truchot. Mm-hmm. Albermont, Domaine Albermont was one of the first. And how did that happen? Well, a good friend of mine, a retail friend who I was selling to. In Maryland? It was actually in D.C. In D.C.? Was one of the famous ones, Calvert? Was a buyer at that time, Rex. Yeah. Sure, that's really cool. And I love the history of retail. And he tasted the Truchot, and I think I also did André Faure Pouilly Fouissé. But anyway, there were I just had a few wines, and he tasted them, and we started getting, relations, buying and so forth, and I was looking for Alsace wine, and he told me about one that was in Wettelsheim that he had heard about from a grower in Beaujolais. Interesting. Diochon, I think, told him about him. So I went looking for the producer. I can't remember the name now, but I couldn't find him. I couldn't find him, and I was knocking on the doors, trying to find this place. And one woman said, "Well, I know those wines; they're good, but you should talk to the young man catty corner across the street because I've tasted his wines, and he's really doing some interesting things." And his name was Maurice Barthelme, and he had married Albert Mann's daughter, and that was how we got started. No kidding. That was 1989. And I think I've probably referenced this in one of these 900 episodes. This continues to be one of my favorite producers, not only in my favorite producer in the Alsace Farms Boucher, as well as they battle. It depends on what day of the week. Mm-hmm. But, one of my favorite producers, period. So that's a pretty interesting story. Yeah. So you started building the portfolio, and you started in France, because that was, you were a Francophile at that point? Yes. And when was the first move outside of France for you? Australia back in, I think it was... Oh, is that right? Yeah. Back when you went and did that? That was the first time? 98, 99. So all these other parts of the world that you now, That was all since then, yeah. Austria, no, I didn't realize that. Austria started in 2000. And you've gotten really heavy into Austria. Yeah. Well, you're passionate about those wines. Well, FX Pichler and Uwe Schiefer... Yeah, it makes it hard not to get excited, right? Gets you excited about Austrian wines, yeah. And so, it's also what I first found out about you back then, Weygandt Metzler. Right? Metzler, right? Yes. And who's that? My wife's maiden name.
I see.
When we did this, it was going to be a hobby. Name didn't matter. You know, it wasn't, didn't,
Right, didn't have
we
to be
should
a
have thought of
brand,
something
right?
really exciting,
Yeah.
you know, but no.
Well, Vaynerchuk's not so exciting either, so I get it. You know, and that's
So we
that's
sort of
that.
imitated the French way. Truchot Martin was the
I
name
see.
of their domain, so
Got
we
it.
thought, wow, we're clever, we'll do it.
All right, so let's get into the first wine. Mark, you can zoom around here. So this is the 09 Riesling, the Cuvée Albert.
Yes.
And so Albert Mon rolls in around $24 US. Now the Cuvée Albert believe it or not, I haven't come across this too often. How long has he been doing this blend? This Cuvée?
A few years now.
Okay.
It's if there were a Premier Cru classification in Alsace, thank you. These are the vineyards that go into this cuvée that would be a Premier Cru, like Altenburg, Rosenberg.
So it's a blend of the top.
Top non-Grand Cru.
And is it the ones that he's not using in the actual single vineyards?
Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously this amazing vineyard. You know, it's being selected, and so it's not the cast-offs because the quality of these vineyards are way too high to even say something in that nature. But it's obviously a blend of the second selection. What would be the proper terminology?
Well,
in your mind,
it was inspired by Albert Mon. They came up with this cuvée because they're trying to make here a wine that they thought that Albert would really like.
I see.
Albert passed away in 1995, and this line is kind of an homage to him. He was a man of the earth. He liked to work hard and a good glass of wine at the end of the day, maybe one in the middle of the day too. And this is
that style.
For me, it's really beautifully representative of the style of the domain Albert Mon.
So
very
how
pure.
many? So are we talking about 5 or 6 different single vineyards that go into this?
It would depend on the vintage, anywhere from 3 to 5 parcels.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's give it a sniffy sniff. So what are you picking up on the nose here?
Well, the beautiful minerality of Alsace mixed with citrus and aromas.
There's a little peachiness for me on
Yes,
this as
a
well.
lot of fruit.
Yeah.
This is honestly the first time I've tasted this in bottle.
Right. So it's been out of barrel for you, right?
It just arrived
And
last week.
what do they put this in? Is it stainless
All
steel?
stainless. Yep. And that's a part of the characteristic of Mon or the Barthelme brothers. They really are experts at extracting the beautiful fruit in the wine, and the 09 vintage is also a vintage.
Yeah. So while we've got you here, and this is the beauty of having an import here, tell us a little bit about Alsace in general in 09. Break us some news for us on that. I've been hearing some really exciting things about the vintage.
Well, 09 across France for me is a vintage that is marked by one word would be fruit. The 09 red Burgundies, the Beaujolais, the
I heard the
Chateau.
Beaujolais is lights out.
A beautiful vintage, yes, superb vintage.
So by fruit, but not too over the top. You don't.
Right.
Do you feel like it's too New World as a vintage? I mean, I've been hearing some rumblings of maybe of that in pockets too.
No, because there's good acidity.
Okay.
And the best growers, now again, I can't speak for all the wines, but the people who harvested at optimal ripeness, did not let them get over the top. They made some very, very well balanced 09s.
Let me ask you an important question. I think that a lot of people watching could find interesting, and I'm curious. How much of other producers' wines are you tasting and/or drinking? Probably more importantly, tasting to create a context for your own producers. Now, I know you've been working with them for a long time, so you know that these guys are quality. But are you in a place where you'll go to Alsace, you'll taste your producers? Do you make a point, or after the fact, or when it hits the market, to try to create some context? Because in my opinion, Peter, one of the big flaws in the wine industry, whether it's a winemaker, vineyard owners, wineries, importers, and retailers, is we play a little inside baseball.
Myopia.
Yeah.
Nearsightedness. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I always look for growers. I look in their cellars. What wines do they have sitting in their cellar?
What are they drinking?
Yeah. And do they have a lot of different wines from a lot of different regions, even countries?
Right.
That's always a good sign.
Because they have a world view.
Yeah, exactly. To answer your question, I try to. I do quite a bit. I should do more.
I think we all should, probably,
I
right?
think you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly after the fact, it's somewhat difficult as an importer to visit
Sure,
other,
it's inappropriate, right?
other
it's
other
inappropriate
producers.
because people think you're, but after the fact,
But
right?
I buy on the shelf, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I mean, this is an incredible wine. The acid on the mid palate to me is what really sings to me on this. Just the balance of this wine is incredible. Great fruit throughout the wine, and there's a beautiful minerality that I think, for me, I almost like when a wine from the Alsace is a little broken, a little too much acid, a little too much minerality, because those are characteristics I enjoy. So even when they could be off balance a hair, as long as they're on my team, as long as it's less about the fruit but more about the minerality and the acid, I kind of get excited. The thing, as I was tasting this and listening to Peter talk, was, wow, this is a really balanced effort.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very good, appropriate insight, because for me, that's what the great producers always are able to achieve. Even in vintages like '09 that are very ripe, and as you said, you know, the criticism sometimes is that they lack acidity. Here, your comment was this has very good acidity, and that's
very good, but not true. More than kind of the fruit and the mineral. It's kind of balancing throughout. And I do actually look for Alsatian wines that take a razor blade and cut my tongue.
Okay.
I do look for the acid. I'm a little bit more attracted to the off balance and the higher acid wines, but the appreciation of something like this is obvious. Now, we're lucky to have you here, and I want to ask an interesting question that I think a lot of people have had in the past as well about imports. Have you been in a scenario, so you started in the mid-'80s, late 80s?
Late 80s.
Late 80s. So in the 20 years or so, how many producers have you had to stop doing business with because maybe they changed their style? Take away financial reasons. Maybe they want to charge more. Take away that. Maybe they want to charge more, not give you enough allocation. Take away business reasons. Purely stylistically, have there been a lot or not?
Stylistically, very few. I work with, I try to find people whose philosophy is somewhat what I'm looking for. Yeah, people who are really deeply, not to use a bad pun, but deeply rooted in the earth, who work the vineyards themselves, who work hard. They don't have a lot of employees.
They're not building a brand.
Right. They're walking the walk, so to speak, and their philosophy is towards terroir and towards balance and towards complexity, and as we have here, picking at optimal ripeness, as opposed to over ripeness or over oaking. And so I really haven't had a lot of situations where I've changed the producer unless there's something happens.
Like
and never in an off vintage. It's only if occasionally, if they really fall down in a great vintage, you
start getting worried.
That gives me some cause for worry.
And which importers were you inspired by, or you feel over the last 2 decades that you've been doing it actively, plus, or 3 decades that you've been into wine? Which importers from afar, and maybe you've gotten to know some of them, have you admired?
Oh, I think that the one that stands out is one who has really done probably the most.
I'm excited now.
To sort of lay the foundation for other importers to come along behind, and that's Kermit Lynch.
Yeah, we were fortunate to have him on the show.
Yeah, he has a great portfolio. I like the way he does business, and
do you know him?
A little bit.
A little bit. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that he knows me, but I know him a little.
Sure.
And there are others, like him. There are other importers like Neil Rosenthal, Joe Dresner.
Joe, who's another one we got to get on the show.
I would put from France, and then in Italy there's there are other really good importers out of Italy. Germany, there's Terry Thies.
What's the last producer you've added to your portfolio?
Chronologically, the last was a superb Côte de Jura producer.
Really?
Yes, his name was Henri Leroy, sometimes, or quite frequently, happens in the wine making business as in the importing business. The person who came there out of just, he did not inherit the vineyards. He was a microbiologist and just wanted to make wine, to acquire these vineyards in the Jura. And old vines, very, very old vines, making just superb Chardonnay.
When do you think Jura has more market appreciation in it in the U.S.? I mean, it'll
take a while. Yeah. It'll take a while, Gary. You asked me which is the last one, and that's the last one chronologically. That's probably not going to be the most important.
Sure.
commercial point
Sure.
of view. But
you're passionate about the
well,
quality, right?
I really love all wines that are really beautifully balanced, complex, and bring something that no other wine in the world
can
quite can imitate.
This has inspired me to ask another question of you. And listen, I mean, I've zinged American wines probably more on this show than anybody would think, being a New World kind of personality. What is, you don't represent any U.S. wines. What is your personal take on American produced wines, Napa, the Pinots from Oregon? Where do you stand on American wine? How much do you drink it, if at all? Knowing the wines that you carry is a loaded question on my end. Very aware of the style, much more towards my palate, which is why I've been fond of the wines. Are you, not that there aren't wines in the U.S. that go for that, but where do you kind of stand on the U.S.?
Well, I think there's a lot of progress, and then I use that from my perspective. Maybe it's a little bit arrogant on my part to be saying progress, but I by that I mean wine making is becoming more terroir oriented, picking at optimal ripeness as opposed to maximum ripeness. There's a lot of young talented people in California, Oregon, Washington, who are very much influenced by what's going on in Europe, in France, and are analyzing and communicating with the growers there about what they're doing, and I think there's some real neat stuff going on.
When you made the play into Australia, that was during the boom of very big, over-the-top Australian wines, and it was a little bit of a curveball for your portfolio. Do you view that in hindsight, even looking at your facial reaction right now, do you look at it somewhat as, do you feel like you veered away from what you believed in wine at some level because you saw a business opportunity, or you wanted to see where the world was going? I was always so curious. Here's my shot to ask you. So curious. It definitely seemed like a little bit of a play of outside your zone. I don't know if it's, I hope, and I really hope you don't view it as like a black eye or anything of that nature, but how do you personally view that venture?
Well, no, it's a fair question,
right?
It's a good question. It's a fair question. When I went into it, it was with this sort of naive notion that I was going to impact.
I see.
And I was going to be picking out the terroir-oriented Australian wines. And I did have some I thought that were like that. Maxwell wines, I thought.
I thought so. The Cabernet especially, I thought was super Cabernet, not Shiraz-like.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good.
And I had a very good one, a good friend, Simon Clayfield in Victoria, and those I really thought were really good wines, and I could get no traction in the press, in the reviewers.
Yeah, I remember.
And but another one that was good was Killiconoon, and they made some fairly terroir oriented wines in the beginning, and then
some
they got
great wines, and then they got too big.
Then they got big.
Yeah.
But that's over.
Yeah. So did you learn a lot?
Yes. It was very good. I mean, it was great experience. Again, in terms of learning about the geography, the geology, it's fascinating to me that the McLaren Vale is virtually the same latitude as Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and the soils are limestone.
Do you feel as though they have an opportunity to do kind of what we're seeing in California, like a little bit of a pushback to some balance? And do you think that's something that you're hearing, or I'm sure you still keep a quarter of an inch of an eye, it's in the back of your mind,
I think that the terroir is always going to be there.
It's there.
Yeah.
It's there.
And so it's just really a matter of, who wants to go forward in that direction.
You made a comment, and we'll move on to the next one. I'm going to rinse for you. You made a comment about you couldn't get traction with the press. And I think we're living right now, I mean, even this show is a representation of some change in the wine world. I think you were an importer, an important importer during what I consider the golden era of wine press. Its maximum power because of the internet. As this show got bigger, I was getting a lot of things written up and getting credit for something I don't deserve credit for. I'm a little cog in something much bigger, which is that the internet is democratizing knowledge, communication, things like cellar tracker and cork and things like that, blogs, the bulletin boards, right? The old Prodigy board, the, Wine Berserkers. This is, again, this show, it's one little nugget. There's clearly been a major shift from where we were 5, 7, 10, 12 years ago, where Wine Spectator and Robert Parker, and then to a smaller degree, a Stephen Tanzer, and then, if you got a little bit nerdy in the last decade, in Alan Meadows with Berghound, really dictated the market. Dictated. Now that we're living through this time where, I think a lot of people are confused. They're blaming the economy for something that I think is happening that is a blind spot to a lot of producers, which is, even when we boom again, I don't think the 96 points Parker, 97 points Wine Spectator, 95 points Stephen Tanzer score is going to move the boxes. They're going to move them. They're always going to move them. But not to the same, this is the only way us retailers buy way. How did you view that era, and how are you what's your take in the last 24, 36 months, 48 months, where clearly we've seen a shift in the power of the press?
Well, that's a really, really interesting, really good question, and that kind of brings me back to when I first started getting interested in wine.
I figured because they didn't have the power in 88 at that level.
There was no press. I was mentioning to Kristen before the store we started that there were a few English writers, and you could always tell they would talk about a wine being good. And then there was one that was very good, and then there was one that was excellent, and then there's one that was strong. So you got to understand what the word good meant.
Right.
There were no scores, there were no numbers,
right.
And the influence of the press was really minor. Everything was the merchant. There was the relation between the merchant.
That's right.
and the ultimate consumer. And I see, in a sense, that perhaps, what do I know? that this globalization of information, this transparency of information, and the things flying around may very, very well lead to that connection again between the consumer and the merchant.
I agree.
And I think that is why, you have a great story. It's a beautiful story, and I think what you're doing is really exciting. And I
wanted to bring it old school.
Yeah.
I grew up studying the wine retail business immensely and reading things about the power that a Sam Aaron had at Sherry Lehman's in the 50s and 60s. They were the voice. And then we went through an era where, people didn't trust the retailer anymore because he was a sales guy. And that was global. That wasn't just a wine industry. And it makes sense.
I still have my copy of the Sherry Lehman 1974 Christmas catalog.
Yeah.
Because it was a masterpiece. They did such a
story told.
Yeah.
They told
it wasn't
stories.
Just,
That's right, 94 points.
Yeah.
They told stories.
It was talking about the producers and everything.
Well, let's talk about this producer